Pitfalls of artificial or cloned identities. Dear Ascending Family, humanity is on an evolutionary path of deep learning as we have entered into a new era. One in which the architecture within the universe has radically changed. This massive shift holds much beauty and much celebration, and having come to this point in the timeline where we can finally be reunited and reconnected with levels of our true higher spiritual expression or God self. At the same time, it's important to remember that through each stage of spiritual initiation, we open into a new frequency, a new architectural pattern, new coding, new fire letters, and this ascension process continues to evolve. Understanding that as we become initiated, this means we begin to be exposed and interconnected to areas filled with new energies, new entities, new technologies, and this content then starts to synchronize into our consciousness body, into our light body as we integrate, assimilate, and accrete these new frequencies on higher dimensional realities. While this is happening, our consciousness body is more vulnerable to an assortment of hitchhikers and interlopers that want to control the direction we move in the future. With our newly awakened consciousness and integrated spiritual identity, one of the most common in AA manipulations is to groom a person with a following or with some online influence by introducing a new false identity to them. This is usually an artificially generated identity that is connected to the individual's subconscious or auric field layers that the dark entity is manipulating for negative purposes. Our job on planet Earth at this time, at least how we frame it within the ES community, is to embody the highest expression of who and what we are as an eternal spiritual being by cultivating our direct relationship with God. As we learn in ES community, there are stages, gradual stages in which we must be very patient, very diligent in our awakening process, in exploring these consciousness layers and the newly flowering spiritual components. Our roadmap is formed by knowing about the spiritual anatomy of our consciousness body, the layers of our light body, and which layers form into the negative ego. We go through stages of connection to our soul extensions, our soul body layers as we integrate the soul body. And this tends to have very emotional implications because our soul is actually our true emotional body that we've been living without. Or because our emotions have been in a very fractured state for a long period of time. When we reconnect with our soul, we're reconnecting with our heart and our true emotional center. And this can be very deeply felt and emotionally penetrating to the point of transcendent spiritual experiences where we feel love as the force of God. And this intensity is lending to that understanding that the healing of the emotional body, the soul body, and working with clearing the collective shadow requires a level of participation and emotional maturity. A process or lifestyle in which patience, respect, self-care, and honoring the process of higher consciousness embodiment by knowing our personal limitations becomes the necessity in order to avoid harmful mental fracturing or recklessness. Because in this fractured state, we are vulnerable to the sophisticated and advanced levels of mind control technology being targeted to humanity, which includes an assortment of red wave weaponry and artificial clone holograms which further run victimize or mind control. Because we may feel and experience grief, loss, shock, and trauma during emotional body healing. This is the element of shadow which allows the transfiguration of dark ignorance to illuminate that content which has been hidden in the deceptions, lies, and falsity. That shadow content also includes false identities of the ego mechanism and false identities of the artificial intelligence projections of false light holograms sent by anti-human forces as spiritual warfare. As we transfigure shadow, these false identities can be manipulated in how they surface into one's awareness. And most of the time when it happens to individuals as they are expanding into another stage of awakening, it is being misunderstood as the individual's newly realized awakened identity in which some special name is being assigned. Maybe in our previous lifetime we were devout followers of the Catholic Church, and now this belief system from our past lifetime surfaces and a host of biblical characters start to show up in our awareness, permeating our consciousness during our sleep state, astral dreams, or in random thoughts. Previously, this has been referred to as the dark entity manipulation using red cube clone imposters. False or cloned identities that have been projected through AI machinery, which is used as spiritual warfare against the awakening population to fracture their minds through imagined or imaginary scenarios that are believed to be real. This is an extension of MK Ultra-based targeting of the awakening population to be derailed into consciousness traps. Using many tactics of information warfare, psychological warfare, and spiritual warfare, many people are unaware of how to test the energies of cloned or false identities and their messaging. Instead, they are tempted by the messages of ego flattery or other negative ego blind spots in which they either believe they are the cloned identity, or are praying and talking to that false or cloned identity in a special relationship that they think is real, or that the deceiving spiritual imposter is truthfully representing themselves. All of that trickery and deceptive content is contained in the collective shadow. And each of us may have a piece of processing that particular shadow found in false and cloned identities. Whether the source is from the individual's negative ego or they are placing trust in spiritual imposters that are negative alien-based false gods. In the earlier stages, we have our own levels of personal shadow to transmute that are connected to our family of origin, that are connected to ancestral genetic, past, present, and future timelines. And then ultimately, once we get through our own family of origin, lineage, genetic path-cutting issues, we become more aware of the collective consciousness streams that are connected to planet Earth, that are connected to the human race, that are connected to the 12 tribes of the original seeding of the human race on this planet. And as we become more and more aligned with our true God self and highest Christos identity, we become more and more in alignment to allowing God presence to express through us and show us the way to learn our spiritual lessons and discover our inner truth. And in order to get to that level of embodied coherence, we have to learn how to move through this process of clearing trauma, of resolving pain, fear, and negative ego mechanisms, which are used as false identities to manipulate or derail us away from deeper layers of truth resonance that connects us directly to God. This path of self-discovery and self-realization takes time. It takes experience. This is the path of gnosis required for the lived direct experiences of achieving integrated consciousness embodiment. Thus, I continually emphasize the absolute necessity of building our spiritual foundation with virtue ethics gained from living our lives through the compassionate practices of the law of one. Through the understanding that the negative ego and its mind control behaviors are toxic and poisonous to us all. It is more difficult at this stage as humanity endures spiritual warfare with AI machinery using assorted psychological warfare tactics to trick awakening people in the ascension or disclosure community with assorted false identities that represent themselves as assorted space groups, famous figures, biblical characters, ascended masters, and twin flames or genetic equals. To avoid these pitfalls and prevent radical self-harm or destructive energies that induce mental and emotional fracturing, We need to learn how to discipline our mind and have some basic skill sets in energy discernment and questioning the narratives with an open mind and open heart. By coming to the place of observer consciousness, of allowing and accepting things as they are in the moment. This is the practice of observe, discern, accept, and then come into neutrality. The ability to synthesize polarities into neutral is key, as the consciousness state of neutrality is the first stage of coming into embodiment of observer consciousness, which is a mandatory skill set when facing off with an assortment of identities, human and non-human. With stable observer consciousness, then with a loving and open heart. When we start to flower our monadic heart and have more embodiment of our true spiritual identity, then the heart blossoms, and we move from observer to compassionate witnessing. That means we hold the field of love, spiritual love, that is God, and through our observer, through our compassionate witnessing, we allow God to express through us in order to reset the field, synchronize the field, and correct shadow distortions present in the field. Through this process of mastering neutral witnessing, we can see things as they are and not what we wish them to be, thus allowing the field of love to harmonize and organize the discordant or dark energies. This is very important on the path of our spiritual development in the midst of a Wild West environment of AI machinery and cloned and false identities acting as spiritual imposters to derail positive-leaning stewards and spiritually inclined leaders running group projects. And even though this part of the spiritual ascension process is not always the popular favorite topic, because people are more attracted to the exciting things, the fantastical things about the esoteric mysteries that humanity is enduring in the planetary spiritual ascension. We desperately need this toolkit to keep us sane and safe in current shadow weaponry. All of this discovery of the nature of reality can seem so incredibly appealing, and it is. It is not to take away from the celebratory nature of human liberation and what is happening on our planet at this particular time. At the same time, in order to achieve the balance, I want to bring a gentle reminder that the overarching theme is to stabilize yourself and to deeply explore what mental and emotional stabilization means. What is stabilization? What is integration? How do you integrate your spiritual selves into wholeness? And that this process of cultivating maturity and spiritual integration, which includes dismantling the negative ego constructs in your body that perpetuate any falsity, any fears, any pain, that can control your perceptions and take control over your impulses to manipulate lower desires. It's a process to honor and respect in order to be able to hold a pure observer consciousness so that you will be prepared in meeting the challenges in the field and can hold your own while participating in or observing a group consciousness field. Every time we move through a different harmonic universe or a different stage which we are integrating, that particular level of collective shadow rises for our clearing and witnessing. And this may include some kind of identity or figure. So, let's say when we're on the path of soul integration, we will be integrating collective race soul shadow. When we come into the monadic embodiment, we will be processing collective monadic shadow. When we come into levels of the Christos and the solar logos, and in the embodiment of the entire universal matrix now. And this is where we are at this particular time, as the universal gates open, as the Emerald Order has introduced itself into our realm. A massive field of universal collective shadow has been dismantled, but it also needs to be transmuted. It's understanding the vastness, the massiveness of what this collective shadow is. The pain that it holds and that we feel that pain inside of us. And understanding that when you touch into that pain, when you feel that pain of collective soul fracture, it's massive and sometimes it can be overwhelming. Thus, We have to have a strong and clear spiritual foundation to process something that is presently so massive that if we are not prepared, it can create mental fracturing. If we are too ambitious, reckless, or ignorant, it can create more confusion and dark energy that feeds into artificial systems of mind control, and this will appear as red wave cloned holograms. If we don't understand what we're processing, and we're exposed to something, or we don't understand what we're looking at or what is expressing through us, we can become confused and easily manipulated as our original intentions are hijacked. And when we are confused in the fog of warfare, we have dark forces and artificial identities that like to jump on the darkness in order to divide and conquer and create the death blows towards any benevolent group project or those serving the Christos mission. This is one of the reasons why, at this time, there is no particular pat answer or understanding that can be given in a complete picture of future ascending timelines, because there are many wild cards of outcomes and results based on the collective consciousness. It's important that you understand we are in uncharted territory. There are no absolute answers, with the exception that our relationship to God, as found inside of our heart as love, is what really matters. We are living through a tumultuous Gnostic process, where we will learn more and more about what has really happened to Earth. As we stay awake in the dark night and take care of ourselves, so we continue to remain stable while discovering many heinous and painful situations surrounding the hidden history of human slavery. Thus, there has been a massive increase in observing mental fracturing, where people that have not prepared themselves mentally or emotionally to come into energetic stabilization and eventually into reasonable coherence have been severely fractured by recent events of shadow rising. Some of these people are visible thought leaders, truthers, or influencers in the ascension and disclosure space, with large groups or online followers that have recently appeared to feel energetically different with artificial overlays. They may also appear physically different in that their body language is defined with jerking movements, incoherent babbling, artificial facial expressions, distant or dissociated eyes when there is identification made with some new space identity or spiritual imposter that suddenly started to communicate with them. It is important to note that individuals that are controlled by some kind of entity attachment or artificial technology overlay will not be able to maintain direct eye contact in conversation with someone who is deeply embodied in spiritual truth. And the fracturing can appear as the belief of an identity of famous people on the spiritual path, such as certain biblical characters, whether it is identity fixation on I am Jesus, I am Pleiadian so and so from the Galactic Federation, I am Enki or Enki's returning, I am this identity or that identity, I am Ascended Master so and so. This is very important to understand that if we do not clear our negative ego and understand the ego identity and its functions in ways that it can directly harm our consciousness, this mental imbalance will be fixated on the perception of yet another false identity. When people insert false identities or AI holographic cloned identities, what they are basically doing is swapping out their ego personality identity in this moment for another identity that is more appealing or glamorous for them or their audience. Maybe they get a radical increase of followers because they have new intelligence tidbits to share, or some other social media clickbait type of astral glamour that is spiritual entertainment. This is not healthy. And it is not advised, because believing you are some artificial identity or talking to one can be exceptionally dangerous. When we connect directly with God, the most important thing for us to understand, especially on the path of anchoring foundational stabilization and heart-based coherence, is to recognize ourselves as part and parcel of God consciousness without any intermediary identity. So, What that means is when you directly connect with God or Christ, know that Christ is the physicalization of God, and Christ is not only the figure of Jesus the Christ. Christ the cosmic Christos is a God sovereign free cosmic citizen. And this potential is the ultimate destiny and ascension path for all of us. So, understanding that we want to break away the veils of false identity, and further, artificial identity clones that act as virtual reality masks that cover up and manipulate our true spiritual identity. We do not want to place another identity as the authority over us. We want to develop our direct relationship with God in the identity you were born into right now, which is the authentic ascending identity. Thus, we're very clear about the identity we're in now during this embodiment. We may have memories from other timelines with identities, but we're not attached to them. It doesn't directly inform us of our future direction or govern our current ascension path. What does inform us is that we are internally directed, and we are connected to our spirit, to God, without intermediary. And that means removing false identities, cloned identities, and false gods that steal our power away from achieving personal autonomy and spiritual self-sovereignty. Even when we remember these other identities, as a part of other timelines or memories, it's important to understand in the collective shadow, we are undergoing spiritual warfare between the identities that may have existed in several higher or different timelines. To stay safe, to stay spiritually aligned, to build your stabilization and coherence, we need to be directly in relationship with God's source and intend to remove all intermediaries in the process that may appear as various famous figures or biblical identities, or even space brothers or other popular names for ascended masters commonly used in the New Age group. Most people at a lower stage of embodiment are not able to handle interaction with other identities from different timelines, because they are unable to distinguish the real identity from the artificial imposter identity being used as a holographic mask to manipulate and use groups of people. There are those of us that are grid workers, or we are embodied in the Christos ray or 7 core tones of Kristalla. And this makes it easier to be able to communicate with assorted identities and not become fixated upon them. We are not to become fixated on special or famous identities that take our authority to connect with God away. Just as we cannot fixate on the negative ego or the ego constructs that form into lower desires and addictions within us. If we are fixated on an identity, that means we're being attached to egoic personality. And we've got to learn to go inside into our heart and develop the direct relationship with God, the direct relationship with ourselves, and release the need to know names and specific material around starseed genetics or other galactic timelines and their identities. It is important to not force that galactic information into your mind, to allow yourself to be in the flow and not force that information into an identity or name, because the war that we are under is a war for our mind. It is a war for controlling our spiritual identity. If you allow dark imposters or red cube cloned identities into your field, they will infiltrate your body and use whatever form of technology they have to gain access to your consciousness, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Once you think you are X, Y, or Z, they will attack that identity with a vengeance, and at such a level that most people will not be able to handle this kind of dark embouchure attack, and will fracture rapidly. They will be pulsed with aggressive suicidal ideation, filled with assorted implants and attachments. So please heed my loving warning. Do not get glamorized with famous identities, doing galactic work, or with grid work in so that you are easily manipulated into hero messiah complexes run by dark forces and their AI consciousness sweeps. Work your negative ego shadow clearing tools and gain maturity and stability in your discernment through an AA education with the search function in the Ascension Glossary and knowing how to discern energy signature skill sets. The dark forces of AI hybrid entities usually begin to target good-hearted vulnerable people with false flattery victimizer programs, where people are told by dark imposters that they are the saviors and only they have the information that can be given to the masses, or whatever the flattery is designed to manipulate in their hapless victims. One of these direct attacks is called building Enki's army, and this common manipulation has gained ground in the Ascension community over the past months. Enki is not humanity's friend. If you are naturally doing that kind of energy work in the world and know yourself to have a starseed mission with clear communication with internal guidance teams, that is something different. But do not force this communication with external galactic entities or other identities. Allow it to be as it is. Learn how to observe, master your mind, master your connection to your inner God spirit, and hold observer in order to discern energy signatures. What is artificial and what is natural? Does it have manipulation signature? It is extremely critical to have discernment of these forces at this time. The attempt to hijack people involved in forming positive groups and in spiritual communities is very aggressive, especially those of us that are working in alignment with the ascension cycle and reclamation of the Christos mission. As we are enduring a lot of change at this time, the NAA aggression and disruption tactics have been very high to prevent awakening people from focusing on the next stages of developing group projects. To be a group leader in the Ascension disclosure space is recognizing this is a Wild West terrain of continual spiritual warfare and takes high levels of spiritual and emotional maturity. Nerves of steel, with a high tolerance for neutralizing fear-based attacks and intimidation tactics, with a heavy spiritual toolkit and love for God. One of my greatest concerns in the awakening spiritual community is that undisciplined and spiritually immature people that are filled with egoic spiritual ambition do not lay the proper foundation of spiritual strength to overcome their ego-pain body and addictions and represent themselves to the public as guides, teachers, counselors, grid workers, or planetary stewards. This is greatly concerning when they are applying ES materials with the energy signature of Crystal Star and the Law of One, but are not congruent, coherent, or aligned to living in the crystal principles in their everyday lives. Recently, another person I am aware of that was desperately needing accolades by attempting to form a public group about ascension-related topics committed suicide, which sadly is becoming more common in this difficult terrain of weaponized words and AI mind control with cloned red wave imposters. Once the red cube identities are infiltrated throughout the consciousness body by reckless and destructive negative ego behaviors, it can be difficult to impossible to get relief from the dark harassment from the entities and the AI tech they are using at this stage. This is not something to trifle with, and all spiritual leaders by default should know the pitfalls in the current spiritual warfare. Things such as drug use, promiscuous sex, addiction, and careless behavior with your mind and body can yield very dangerous and painful results, especially if the individual has decided to take on this ascension disclosure subject in the online setting. Unfortunately, or fortunately, the information on our websites is Creative Commons and it is given freely to the public for their use with attribution back to our website, with the intention to share information in a free information society or open source movement which supports disclosure. The challenging piece of this offering is that people that have no idea about TS or the ethical standards of integrity that are required to represent this body of work. Thus, Many people are exposed to this work through other teachers who do not maintain the same ethical standards. And I become linked through association to the person or group who does not know any better. It is a way to smear my image and to associate my stewardship with those people who are imposters or who act in unethical ways. There is nothing I can do about this. It is the nature of the spiritual burden that exists because it has to at this time of ascension and disclosure. All people must develop discernment for themselves to be able to determine the quality of energy that they interact with, and be able to also source their own darkness and shadows surfacing when exposed to the light of higher consciousness. All of us have to learn and walk the ascension path to gain direct experience. However, at the very least, superior and inferior vacillation of negative ego thoughts and pain body tantrums should be understood as harmful behaviors, which are totally unacceptable and very destructive in group setting. Leadership is not tyrannical abuse or power trips that a person uses to satisfy their subconscious desires by mistreating others sexually or psychologically. We have had very poor examples of leadership in public life, and this false king of tyranny and lunar female dark mother model is what we are working very hard to overcome in the mind slides and conditioning of the awakening groups in the ascension or disclosure spaces. Many people have been conditioned with very bad habits of negative ego vices, and as the result, they accept this level of very harmful behavior demonstrated in leadership or with those that exert a powerful influence on many other people. We must rise to the occasion and be impeccable in how we treat others with empathy, dignity, and respect, and that we always are in self-control and aware of our behaviors, impulses, and actions that impact others when sharing our group consciousness field mission. Let's revisit some of the most common victim-victimize or red wave frequencies that ignites into self-harming and destructive behavior of negative ego, that adds to the root downfall of spiritual community or other groups. Unchecked negative ego behaviors of spiritual arrogance, spiritual superiority, and self-entitlement. Power abuses, classifying or labeling people with separative or demeaning language. Extremely poor conflict resolution skills, poor compassionate communication skills, poor self-assessment skills. All leads to poor discernment and poor decisions. Using the group for sexual conquest, or hiding behind a wind flame or other ascension language to excuse having sex with many people, or abusing power in sessions or group work as an excuse to have sex with others you are attracted to. Unchecked addiction problems leading to severe distortions in guidance or higher sensory perception. Being manipulated by forces through blind spots created by addiction and attachment. Promoting or thriving upon archetypes of drama, hysteria, hero-savior language, malicious gossip behind others' backs in your own group. Not putting your own house in order. Your personal life is a mess and in constant drama, lack of self-leadership, and still point. Character defamation, triangulation, and gossip about another spiritual leader, or accusations of running a cult without any evidence or direct experiences that verify that as accurate. Entitlement to access spiritual material/information without fair value exchange. Being clueless to the time, energy, and effort it takes to build resources in the spiritual warfare environment. Using terminology such as ego and free will to demean, undermine, and use as a verbal weapon against another person. Using gaslighting techniques to undermine or belittle another group's personal experiences and knowledge that is expressed in the group's teachings and writings. Presenting as having a superior knowledge of genetics and its role, and doing comparisons of genetics, suggesting elitism or special mission more important than anyone else. aggrandizing the self as having superior knowledge of ascension and genetic information in comparison to having emotional temper tantrums of yelling, screaming, and crying when confronted with concerns expressed by others, presenting as entitled to other people's private information for their own personal gain and sense of superiority couched as data collection, putting leaders or other identities on a pedestal so they can be knocked down and dragged in the mud in the future when that person disappoints their egoic needs, planting seeds of confusion and fear in others if they continue to follow and participate in the group or community of their choosing, treating people badly that you don't know at all, making negative assumptions that are generally not true, classifying people in value ranking system, or constantly using the excuse that person is possessed or dark because you don't like them, not being able to identify abusive, harmful, addictive or destructive behaviors before it blows everything up and destroys trust in people, destroying the group's unified cooperation. We are responsible for ourselves and for our own shadow, and we do not project this shadow upon other people. This is a part of the self-responsibility that is needed and necessary to be connected to this community field and any level of coherent ascension work. And again, bringing that stabilization into our current awareness. This is where we need to be, not out there doing grid work or deciding to take on massive projects we cannot handle. We need to be meditating, stabilizing and centering ourselves to gather strength and clarity and putting our own houses in order. Stabilize yourself, get strong, hunker down. This is not the time to be way out there in the ethers. It's to come in and embody, really do the shadow work, clear it out, get strong, get prepared for what's coming in the global scape. And again, it's understanding that whenever we're under a level of planetary initiation like we are right now, the dark forces tend to capitalize on the fact that things are ambiguous or vague or nebulous. Because when we're in a process of integrating into a higher frequency level, generally the consciousness bodies are more vulnerable to hijack or infiltration when we are in that transition. We are undergoing a very special time with the global awakening that is happening to humanity. And all of us on planet Earth at this time are taking some part in the planetary liberation and human ascension. Further, it is prudent to recognize that this planetary event remains hidden and is being used against us as well, because very few people are aware of the depths of spiritual warfare with artificial or cloned identities, of the dark night of the soul, or aware of what weaponry is used to take control over our minds. And this is why it is absolutely critical for us to remove those intermediary identities and those false or cloned identities that use glamorous spiritual entertainment to interfere with our ability to connect directly with God and our higher spiritual selves. With a loving heart, Lisa.